All right, so general hybrid hexagon twists. That's a lot of words, but we're going to go through how I use them in origami tessellations, how you can construct them and make models of each of the individual varieties, of which there are more than a dozen. And then we're going to go through and fold a bigger piece with one of those varieties. So starting out, looking at how these are used in tessellations, I started out being able to use the threefold rotationally symmetric hybrid hexagon twist. And these I was using in threefold rotationally symmetric positions, often with two different sizes, of triangle twist. And what I didn't realize at the time is that this is actually exactly the same technique that I would end up using for Menagerie, this one that we'll look at in a moment, where I'm modifying the open hexagon that's native to the pattern into all of these different hybrid twists. So after I learned to use the threefold hybrid hexagon, I learned to use the twofold hybrid hexagon, and I do have videos on each of those specifically. And the twofold hybrid hexagon opens up even more symmetry options, and particularly nice symmetry options, because when you have that twist outside of the center in a twofold rotationally symmetric position, then you're going to get nice borders every time. So that's a particularly nice use case of these hybrid hexagon twists. And then there's like the whole menagerie of all of them. This piece I actually do call Menagerie because it has all of the different options between a closed hexagon twist and an open hexagon twist. It has this pentagon shape. It has that pentagon shape. There's also a kite in here somewhere. Well, there's that pentagon as well. There's the kite and this kind of bookmark shape and this pointy shape and the opposite paired pointy shape, the twofold rectangle, the wherever it is, the twofold diamond. Over here, I've got this trapezoid. I have excuse me, COVID got me down for 2 weeks. I'm just getting back. I've got this teardrop shape. Like, there's so many different options. And you can see I've plugged them into this hexagons and triangles alternating pattern. And I'm able to do that because when I shift the pleat to create the hybrid, then I'm also shifting the pleat for the neighboring triangle and making that open instead of closed. So that's what's going on with this setup. And we'll see more about that when I demonstrate, like, how do you get each of these different options. And then we can use these funky shapes in a excuse me, a different symmetry style. And there's really options of different symmetries that you can use them in. Obviously, most of these are not rotationally symmetric, so other than the threefold, the triangular one, and the twofold rectangular and twofold diamond, none of the rest of them have rotational symmetry, so they need to be put in positions that don't require any. So I have a sixfold rotationally symmetric position in the center, and then I have 3 of these funky pentagons rotating around a triangle that has threefold rotational symmetry in the broader pattern. And then the twofold rotational symmetry is in this loop of 2 of these hybrid hexagons and 2 triangles on the back. So we're able to get the full symmetries, and this is the densest symmetries that you can use these hybrid hexagons that don't have their own rotational symmetries in, by placing them in a non-rotational position and then using the threefold symmetry in the triangle that's next out. So looking from the back, I have my 6-fold centers, my 3-fold centers, and then directly between 2 6-fold positions, which is also directly between 2 3-fold positions, I have the 2-fold position right there in the middle. So that's the same symmetry that we're going to use today. This is the piece that we're going to be working on. And this one makes the position of 3-fold rotational symmetry super obvious because it pulls that triangle out away from everything else. And this one is called Clematis, spelled C-L-E-M-A-T-I-S. It's named after a flower, and it looks rather floral on both sides. So you know how I was saying there are different options for symmetries on these guys? Well, you can take that same central motif, and instead of putting the 3-fold position in the next triangle, you can stick it out in the next hexagon. And that actually gets you back to having nice borders, because in this previous one, I had to fold all the way to the edge because in order to get the pattern alignment, I needed to cut across the tiling breaks. So with the symmetry further out, we get back to those tiling breaks being aligned with the pattern repeats. And still here, the 2-fold rotationally symmetric position is in the middle of that loop of alternating hexagon, triangle, hexagon, triangle. And I'm calling these hexagon because that's how the pleats go. Not that it's a regular hexagon, but it is a hybrid hexagon. And then, excuse me, there are some hexagon twists that really do not look like hexagon twists. These are kind of a different group than the standard, quote-unquote standard, the ones in Menagerie, hybrid hexagons. And they have these 3 triangles that are kind of squashed around this center, and it actually makes a really interesting shape on the back. But again, it's a hexagon because there are 6 pleats coming off of it, and then you can use it however you like. So this is not what I would necessarily consider a hybrid hexagon, but it is another option of something you can put in a hexagon tile where all 6 pleats have the same pleat depth that is not a closed or an open hexagon. So maybe I'll do a video specifically on that twist later. But for now, I'll grab a 16-fold grid on a hexagon, and really you could get away with using 8 divisions here, but 16 is going to really let you hold on to all those pleats while you're squashing things. So, pop quiz time. What is the difference between a closed hexagon twist and an open hexagon twist? And Nancy, good question. The grid lines are going point to opposite point, but that doesn't really matter. You can do the same thing with your grid going the opposite way. So for a closed hexagon twist, what's happening is all of my mountain folds are going directly into the center. Now, it might not look like it right here, but if I open it up, I can see all of my mountains are going straight to the center of the twist. And then the open hexagon, the difference is that all of my mountains are going one spacing away from the center. So if I have everything one spacing away from the center and squash that, now these are the only fold lines. So the grid plus this open hexagon boundary are the only fold lines that I will use for all of the 12 hybrid hexagon twists. So, how do I do a hybrid? Well, if you think back to the hybrid square twists, we did some directions of pleats like a closed square and the other direction like an open square, or like a double open or whatever other size. And we're going to apply the same principle here, but we're going to do it pleat by pleat. So, excuse me, right now, all of my pleats are going one spacing away from the center. But if I take a pleat and turn it back to going directly, so have that mountain go directly into the center, now it's sitting like this, and I have this section here that I can flatten out. And I can do that with whatever pleats that I want. So this is the option with one pleat moved. And then my options with two pleats moved is I can have this one, and I can have, so skipping one, going to the next. And that's my kite shape. If I put that pleat back and instead shift the opposite pleat, that gets me the two-fold rectangular hybrid hexagon twist. But there's another option, and this option I didn't realize until very recently. And that option is to shift a pleat that is neighboring, so either this one or this one, neighboring the pleat that was already shifted. And so I can shift that neighboring pleat. You can see when I shift this, I'm trying to keep as much as possible. And now I have that little pocket that I crush, and I'm going to get a little kink in the pleat here that's going to fall exactly on that open hexagon boundary. And now I have this pentagon. Okay, so, and now we have all the three options of two pleats moved. Okay, how many options are there with three pleats moved? Well, there's the one where all three are neighboring each other. There's, excuse me, the one where you go 1, 2, skip, shift the next. There's the one where you go 1, 2, skip 2, and then hit the next. So these two kind of pointy ended, so pointy on one side, rectangle-ish on the other. I count those as distinct options because for a given twist direction, it is distinct. And then the final option, so we saw three options already, is what if we don't have any of the shifts next to each other? And that's how we get the threefold hybrid hexagon twist. So, excuse me, that was the options for three pleats shifted. Bring it back to our open hexagon so we can see the options for four pleats shifted. which is basically the opposite of the options for 2 pleats shifted. So we can have 4 pleats shifted with them all next to each other. So 1, 2, 3, 4. We get this kind of bookmarky shape. Or we could have 1, 2, 3, and then skip 1. That's how we get this trapezoid shape. And then we can shift another one further along and get the diamond. And so that was the 3 options of the ones that are not shifted being together, being one apart, being opposite. So then the next option is, well, what happens if you have 5 pleats shifted? You get the teardrop. What happens if you have 6 pleats shifted is that you end up with a closed hexagon twist that has been back twisted, kind of half a grid spacing, which you may as well turn into a closed hexagon. So that is how you make all of the different varieties of hybrid hexagon that are exactly between the closed and the open hexagon twist. Now, there are 3 more options that I want to show you that are not exactly between those two and that require some extra folds on the paper. So I'm going to come back to my open hexagon twist. And I do recommend making models of each of the individual twists when you have the time. But for demonstration purposes, you can work them all on the same grid. So the other option from here is, what if you take half of the pleats? So functionally, we're going to fold an open trapezoid twist from that hexagon, and then put our closed hexagon pleats back in underneath. So the difference from the open trapezoid, I had my mountain going out this way. Now I'm going to return that mountain to where it was on the hexagon and set up half of a closed hexagon underneath. So you see that little trapezoid underneath. And it turns out that that totally works, surprisingly. So this is the first hybrid hexagon twist that I found. But I still haven't used it in an actual tessellation. I could now. I have the theory. But it's one of those things that I just haven't gotten around to doing. Now this next one I have used in a tessellation, and so this is basically saying, okay, what if I take this pleat and shift it like I did with the more standard hybrid hexagons? I can take that, shift it in here, and I'm going to end up with a closed trapezoid. So this rhombus shape with the cutout leg, that's a closed trapezoid on top of there. And excuse me, if I remember correctly, this is actually a 2-fold rotationally symmetric arrangement of pleats. So flipping over, yeah, so I have these 3 pleats coming to a point, 3 pleats coming to a point, separated by 1 grid spacing. This is a two-fold rotationally symmetric arrangement of pleats. And so this is another two-fold rotationally symmetric hybrid hexagon twist, and I have used it as such in patterns. The last but certainly not least option that we have here is saying, okay, let's take this pleat now and shift it back. And this is going to turn into a triangle up top, or maybe I should double check my notes on which pleat exactly I'm shifting. But one of these pleats, one of these days, I'll remember which pleat it is. But suffice to say, there's still another option, and I can take a moment and bring up the crease pattern for that, so I can, actually remember. It's another one that I have not used in actual tessellations, and so it's not something that I have in my mind very firmly. I just know that there's a little triangle on top. But once my file opens, come on, Inkscape. Good practice for next week when I'm going to be doing things in Inkscape. Okay, so I was on the right track, I just didn't get the execution. So I'm going to be shifting this pleat coming to the pointy bit, coming down and into here. It's going to make this very funky arrangement of things, and this is going to squash into a triangle if my grid isn't too tired. And so we get this very knotted up option that still has 6 pleats with single depth. And now instead of 3 and 3, I have 4 and 2 coming to different centers. So that's what's going on here. And may as well, since I have it up, show you the spiky option. So opening things up, this one I am going to use pen for. I'm going to be coming around this particular grid triangle, zoom in a bit more, and what I'm going to have is mountains coming out of each of these directions, and also mountains coming out of each of these directions. And it's the kind of thing where I squash it all at once, but you might not want to. So when you bring up all of these mountains, you're going to have a very funky shape. And so each of the triangles is going in these locations. So I can get a triangle starting to squash here, and a triangle starting to squash here. And this is acting a little bit funky because I already have a lot folded on this grid. And I can have another triangle starting to squash here. And then I need to rotate the center around so that I create the valleys that will finish each of these triangles. So yeah, this is an advanced twist. It's not as easy as the others. But you can do it directly from the grid if you're willing to accept a certain amount of imprecision. And then you get that nice little triangle that's been subdivided in 3 in the background. So that's all for the demos. Now it's time to come back and look at the bigger grid. So now we're going to start folding Clematis. And let's take a quick look at what's going on in this pattern before we start folding. And I expect the 24-fold grid will get us about this much. So like just out to the 3-fold points on this pattern. So in the center, I have a closed hexagon twist, and it is surrounded by closed triangle twists at the densest spacing possible. So that's the first thing we're going to do, and then we'll come back to fold the hybrid hexagons after. So starting out, I have my 24-fold triangle grid on a hexagon, and I'm going to be folding a closed hexagon twist, and the grid lines are going from corner to opposite corner. So my mountain folds are coming straight out to the corners of the paper, and I'm folding so that on my right hand side my valley is above the mountain, so that this will be a right-handed twist. I'm going around adding new pleats, making sure my previous ones stay folded, but I'm not getting too fussy about what's going on in the middle, with making sure my middle is sticking up. I'm not being too picky about how much my valleys are present towards the center. And once I have that closed hexagon twist set up, I can either pick it up and rotate it in the air with everything as a cone, or I can bop it, grab it, twist it, with the rest of my paper still on the table. And that second method is more general, no matter what size of paper or size of grid you're using. The first method tends to be a bit more comfortable for beginners. So, water break, give you a chance to catch up. So next up, we're going to be putting those closed triangle twists on the opposite side. So I'm going to flip the paper over, and it doesn't really matter how I flip. I'm just going to grab a pleat that is horizontal and on my right hand side, and I'm going to be putting in that closed triangle twist so that the center is one spacing out from the closed hole. I'll zoom in to show this. So this will cause overlap between our new pleat and the existing neighboring pleat. Excuse me. And then because this triangle, because our next twist is going to be on the opposite side, it's going to be easiest to go clockwise around. So I want to pull the pleat out. So first I'm going to rotate so that the pleat that's sitting under this triangle is horizontal. I'm going to pull that pleat out and put in exactly the same triangle, making a pleat overlap that's coming right under the corner of that previous triangle as I do so. And I'm assuming, since you're watching an advanced video on general hybrid hexagon twists, that you do know how to put in a closed triangle twist. So I'm not giving too much detail on that. Rotating around, I'm going to do the exact same thing again. And remember, we're trying not to skip pleats. So if you do your hexagon, or sorry, if you do your next triangle and it's not coming up right neighboring with the previous triangle, undo that, go back, grab the pleat that is sitting under the pleat from the previous triangle, and make your triangle there instead. And again, the test of whether you've done it correctly is that the edge of the new triangle should be right on the edge of the previous triangle. And squash. And next, and I just want to make sure as I'm doing this that everything is staying on grid lines, with the exception of the closed triangle twist boundaries, of course. Excuse me. So then for our final pleat, coming out of this closed hexagon hole, I'm going to do something slightly different because I need to make 2 pleat overlaps. So I can set up one we've been having as normal, but then the next one, I don't want to just close over that. That would be an unfriendly overlap for the other side. So what I can do instead is let the valley from the new triangle continue through after the mountain from the old triangle. And the easiest way to resolve this is actually going to be with a compound wrap. So I'm going to let the mountain zigzag as it crosses the previous mountain, and let that close up before I squash my triangle twist. Okay, so now we have one unique spot and the rest of everything is the same. So I'm going to grab that unique spot as I flip my paper over, and that's where we're going to start whatever comes next. So looking back at the reference, or the reference pattern, what I see is that at the intersection of the pleats from the 2 closed triangles on the back, I have one pleat, the one coming from the top, that is acting like an open hexagon, and another pleat that's acting like a closed hexagon. So how can we see this in the paper? I'm going to grab my odd one out, and actually it's kind of already set up to do that with that compound wrap. So I have this bit diving in, and if I were to treat this whole thing like, well, we don't have to treat it all like an open hexagon, but the point is So this is how it was laying down. The point is that these mountains I'm actually going to keep in the final twist. Now the difference is I'm going to also have these, or that grid line, passing above as a mountain. So I need to let that be a mountain. And I notice that, excuse me, I notice on the base pattern that I have these 3 spacings between the next pleat going down and the next pleat coming into my twist. So I'm going to have these 3 spacings. Notice when I drew this mountain, I drew it 3 spacings. And that's going to correspond to this edge of the twist. And so now I have my new pleat here, and this one, the next one, and the third are going to act all 3 like open triangle twists, or sorry, open hexagon pleats. So I've got pointy star, point of the pointy star, point of the pointy star, and then the next one is going to act closed. It's going to come straight in to the center of the points of the pointy star. And I'm going to have this pleat overlap that's really dense into what I'm working on. And that is how I'm going to set up my kite twist. So from here you might be wondering, well, when we set up the hybrid hexagons previously, we always had those open hexagon lines already folded before we started. And so on these pointy star bits, it's pretty straightforward to put in those open hexagon lines just by pressing down like we would with any other open hexagon. And then these bits underneath, we're going to take a bone folder and make sure that they're going in as far as they can. So they're going to go exactly on the seam lines there. I'll put it back down so the resolution in the camera goes back up. So that's our first kite. Excuse me. And now we need to fold our next one. And so we have an option. Do we go back into the dense area, or do we carry through to the less dense area? My preference is to work in the less dense area. And the first thing that I'm going to do when I'm coming into this area is I'm going to want to look for where I need a pleat that will cross this one. And we can look back at our reference pattern and say, oh, there's 1 spacing of open space between these 2 twists. Therefore, the valley must come through 2 spaces back because our mountain is hitting 1 spacing from this corner. So we know that this mountain goes 2 spaces before it hits a valley. Very useful information. We're going to pop it down on that valley and make a triangle wrap on top. So now you see this is 1 spacing away between the corner of the twist and the triangle wrap. And then we're going to open the pleat overlap, and just like before, well, before we had the compound wrap instead of the pleat overlap, but this top grid line is going to carry through as a mountain. And as I bring this up, the place I'm counting from is right here. So I'm going to have, and in terms of the puffy triangle star, or sorry, the puffy hexagon star, this one is going to be part of the puffy hexagon. This is my center point, and this is a notch underneath with a mountain heading straight to the center. But if I can't see that in here, I can always remember, okay, the next pleat out is 3 spaces away and parallel. And then it goes in one, out one to the next pleat, which goes in one, out one to the next pleat. I already have that last pleat from the triangle wrap. And I can go ahead and squash this twist using my bone folder to get those notches on the inside. And then I will repeat exactly. So I've got 2 spaces of mountain here before my valley comes through, and I create my triangle wrap. And then down below, even being a little bit agnostic to exactly what's going on, I'm going to have 3 spaces to my next mountain fold. And then it's going to go in one, out one, next mountain, in one, out one, next mountain. And that'll get me set up just as well as if I know exactly what's going on in here. And then I'll squash my third kite hybrid hexagon. So this is one of the reasons why I really love these hybrid hexagon twists. It's because you can squash them directly from the grid, and you can use them to make all kinds of new patterns that have never been seen before, and there's so many options. So if we think of just this symmetry type, where I'm using a hybrid hexagon twist in a position that does not have any rotational symmetry at that position itself, and then I have the rotational symmetry like around that position, that is going to get me, need to fix that in there, that is going to get me, for each of the non-rotationally symmetric hybrid hexagon twists, of which there are 9, not counting the counting the non-standard hybrids, the 3 that I showed towards the end, and maybe even, okay, so we've got the Spiky, not exactly hybrid, the 3-fold hybrid, the 2-fold rectangle, the 2-fold diamond, and the 2-fold funky. So those 5 can go in some other rotationally symmetric positions, but the rest of them cannot. And so there are, so if you count the 3 funky ones plus the spiky one also as hybrids, that gets you to, so I started with 12, and then adding 4 more gets me to 16, 5 of which have some rotational symmetry. So that leaves me with 11 that do not have rotational symmetry. Excuse me. And therefore, Each of those 11 that do not have rotational symmetry have 6 distinct ways to place them in these positions. Just think on that for a little bit. 6 distinct ways. The rotationally symmetric ones, so that's 66 options right there for like what to put in this position. And I should be a little bit more explanatory on this last one. We're coming in, we need to open up this pleat that was locked away. We're going to focus on those 3 spaces as our measurement, and then let this be a triangle wrap over the top, and then finish our twist as usual. Okay, so 66 different ways to put a non-rotational hybrid hexagon twist into these positions. Then of our rotationally symmetric ones, 2 were 3-fold rotationally symmetric, which means they have 2 different options of how to go in these positions, and 3 were 2-fold rotationally symmetric, which means they have 3 options each. So we get another 4, bringing us up to 70, and 79 different options of what to put in these positions, and that is after we choose the central hexagon, whether it's open or closed, and then those triangles, whether they're open or closed, front or back, how far apart they are from the hexagon. There are so many options. And then here, outside of these hybrid hexagon twists, we're going to flip to the back, and I've chosen to use closed triangle twists here. You could totally put open triangle twists. It would not, I mean, it would make a different pattern, but it would not mess up anything. It would make it a little bit denser, have some overlapping pleats, but I mean, why not? You already have dents in the middle. So I guess what I'm saying is, this system of hybrid hexagon twists has so many options that there's no way that I could explore them in a lifetime. And so I welcome you to come help me explore what's going on here. So the next step, if we're going to fold this with more repeats, is finding that pleat that has the triangle that's the position of 3-fold rotational symmetry. And so looking at our base pattern, I notice that I have a tube coming out of things, and then I have a third pleat coming out parallel, and that third pleat is where I'm putting that closed triangle on the front. So I have a tube, I have a third pleat, and I'm going to put that closed triangle right there, and that's going to be all that we can get on this size of grid. So this is not how I would do it if I had more grid. I would be going around putting in 2 triangles per next hexagon. But since we have so little grid and we're not able to get in the next pieces, I'm going to go around and put in all 6 of these closed triangle twists. And that's actually one of the big mistakes that I see when folding origami tessellations, that people see the next thing to do and they go ahead and do all 6 of them right away instead of waiting and saying, oh, actually, what I wanted to do is follow the tiling break and work my way around, starting from this point, but not doing all 6 of them right at once. So there we have the base unit of Clematis, and I hope you try some more tessellations with hybrid hexagon twists. And if you're interested in the crease pattern for this one or any of the other demo pieces that I showed today, head on over to learn more about Tessellation Garden, training.gatheringfolds.com/garden, which is my living library of tessellation crease patterns and photos and organization that I just released, that has over 350, I think it's pushing 390 right now, excuse me, crease patterns, and I'm going to be adding more every time that basically every time that I have a new batch to photograph, which is about every 6 to 8 weeks. And the new batches tend to be in the 10 to 20 pattern range. So if you're interested in seeing crease patterns for all of these that I showed today, then definitely head over to Tessellation Garden and get yourself access to that. So that is all for today. The next series is going to be on how to draw crease patterns efficiently. So not spending all day drawing a crease pattern, using those symmetries to help us so we can get the minimum piece that will copy and paste without rotation. And I'm going to go through all the different symmetry styles and the different quirks that they have for drawing crease patterns. So I hope to see you there, and happy folding!